Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into a list that might surprise you. It's the top 10 countries Americans may not be able to visit in 2025. Whether it's due to political reasons, security concerns, or changing travel policies, there are places around the world that have become increasingly difficult for Americans to access. Let's take a look at some of them. Number 10. North Korea. In 2017, the U.S. government imposed a ban on travel to North Korea after the tragic case of American student Otto Warmbier, who was detained, mistreated, and eventually returned to the U.S. in a coma, later passing away. The incident drew attention to the dangers Americans might face if detained in North Korea. Since then, the U.S. Department of State has classified North Korea as a Level 4. Do not travel destination due to serious safety risks and a lack of diplomatic support for U.S. citizens in the country. North Korea remains one of the most enigmatic and restricted places in the world, virtually closed off to Americans. While it may be intriguing from a distance, the risks associated with traveling there are high, especially for U.S. citizens. Number 9. Syria. Since 2011, Syria has been in the grip of a devastating civil war, which has led to widespread destruction, political turmoil, and a humanitarian crisis. What began as peaceful protests during the Arab Spring escalated into a brutal conflict involving multiple factions, including government forces, opposition groups, extremist organizations, and international players. As a result, Syria has become a highly volatile zone, with regions often shifting between control by various groups, making it extremely dangerous for travelers. The U.S. Department of State has classified Syria as a Level 4. Do not travel destination due to these safety risks. Americans who attempt to travel to Syria face the risks of armed conflict, bombings, kidnappings, and even chemical attacks in some areas. In many cases, foreigners, especially Westerners, are seen as targets by extremist groups operating within Syria. With the country still enduring the effects of a prolonged war, Syria remains a high-risk zone for anyone, especially American travelers. The tragic transformation of Syria from a popular tourist destination to a conflict zone highlights the unpredictable nature of international relations and the importance of safe, informed travel. Number 8. Libya. Libya has been in turmoil since 2011 when a civil war led to the ousting and death of longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi. Following this, the country was left with a power vacuum that triggered political instability, militia conflicts, and violent clashes between various factions. Today, Libya is split between rival governments and is plagued by ongoing battles, particularly over control of vital resources like oil. The U.S. Department of State has classified Libya as a Level 4. Do not travel country because of severe security risks, including armed conflict, terrorism, and kidnapping. Since Libya lacks a stable central government, the safety of foreigners cannot be guaranteed, and Americans, in particular, are at risk due to strained U.S.-Libyan relations. Libya's current state of instability makes it one of the most hazardous destinations for Americans. With armed groups, political fragmentation, and a fragile infrastructure, the country remains far from safe for tourism, making it advisable to avoid travel until conditions improve significantly. Number 7. Yemen. Yemen has been embroiled in a brutal civil war since 2014, when Houthi rebels took over the capital city, Sana'a, and forced the internationally recognized government into exile. This led to a devastating war involving regional powers, primarily Saudi Arabia and Iran, who support opposing sides in the conflict. The fighting has caused widespread destruction, displacing millions of people and creating a severe humanitarian crisis. Due to these safety concerns, the U.S. Department of State has classified Yemen as a Level 4. Do not travel country. For American travelers, Yemen is particularly dangerous due to violent clashes, ongoing airstrikes, and frequent attacks on civilians. Access to safe zones is minimal, and the lack of stable governance and law enforcement only heightens the risks. Yemen's tragic situation has turned it into one of the world's most dangerous places, especially for Americans. With severe risks from conflict, terrorism, and a humanitarian crisis, it is unlikely that Yemen will be a safe travel destination anytime soon. Number 6. Iran. Relations between the United States and Iran have been strained for decades, primarily due to political and ideological differences. Since the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the subsequent U.S. Embassy hostage crisis in Tehran, the two countries have had limited diplomatic ties. This tension was further exacerbated by disagreements over Iran's nuclear program, leading to sanctions and travel restrictions from both sides. For Americans, obtaining a visa to Iran has become difficult, and travel is generally not advised by the U.S. Department of State due to security concerns. While Iran is home to remarkable history and culture, political issues and strict regulations make it a difficult and risky destination for American travelers. The challenges of obtaining a visa, limited freedoms, and high risk of detainment mean that, for most Americans, travel to Iran is currently not advisable. Number 5. Afghanistan. Since the U.S. withdrawal in 2021, Afghanistan has been under the control of the Taliban, leading to an uncertain and volatile environment. The U.S. Department of State has classified Afghanistan as a Level 4 do not travel destination due to risks associated with terrorism, armed conflict, and a lack of consular support. Afghanistan remains in a state of transition, and tensions continue with terrorist groups operating in the region, making it extremely dangerous for American travelers. For U.S. citizens, the absence of a stable government, consistent violence, and strained diplomatic relations create substantial barriers to travel, with very limited options for assistance if an emergency occurs. Afghanistan's current state of conflict and lack of support infrastructure makes it one of the riskiest destinations for American travelers. With ongoing threats from terrorism, a high risk of kidnapping, and strict cultural restrictions, Afghanistan remains a place that should be avoided until the situation significantly improves. Number 4. Russia. Since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, relations between the U.S. and Russia have dramatically deteriorated, leading to severe diplomatic tensions and the imposition of sanctions. The U.S. Department of State has issued a Level 4 do not travel advisory for Russia, citing the risks associated with travel, including military conflict, arbitrary detention, and restricted access to consular support. The ongoing war in Ukraine and the political climate in Russia have created an increasingly hostile environment for foreign nationals, especially Americans. Russia's current political climate, exacerbated by its involvement in the war in Ukraine and its increasingly repressive government, makes it an extremely risky destination for American travelers. The lack of consular support, the threat of arbitrary detention, and the general instability in the country all contribute to the travel restrictions placed on Americans. Until the situation improves, it is advisable for U.S. citizens to avoid traveling to Russia. Number 3. Belarus. Since President Alexander Lukashenko's rise to power in 1994, Belarus has remained an authoritarian state with significant political repression. The country has long been criticized for its lack of democratic freedoms, human rights violations, and harsh treatment of opposition figures. In recent years, the political situation has worsened, especially after the 2020 presidential elections, which were widely viewed as fraudulent. Protests against Lukashenko's regime were met with violent crackdowns, including arrests, torture, and repression of dissent. In addition to internal issues, Belarus has closely aligned itself with Russia, particularly during the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Belarus has supported Russia's actions, including hosting Russian troops and allowing its territory to be used in military operations. This has strained relations with the U.S. and other Western nations, prompting the imposition of sanctions and travel advisories. The U.S. Department of State has classified Belarus as a Level 4 do not travel country due to political repression, the risk of detention, and the lack of consular support. Belarus's political repression, alignment with Russia, and risk of detention make it an extremely hazardous destination for American travelers. The lack of consular support, ongoing human rights violations, and the potential for getting caught in geopolitical conflict mean that travel to Belarus should be avoided, especially until the political and diplomatic situation improves. Number 2. Somalia. Somalia has been in a state of turmoil for decades, primarily due to civil war, political instability, and the presence of extremist groups like Al-Shabaab, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. Although the central government has made efforts to stabilize the country in recent years, the situation remains highly volatile. The U.S. Department of State has classified Somalia as a Level 4 do not travel destination due to the serious risks associated with terrorism, armed conflict, kidnapping, and lack of infrastructure. This advisory strongly urges Americans to avoid all travel to Somalia. Somalia remains one of the most dangerous countries in the world for American travelers due to its unstable security environment, ongoing terrorism, political volatility, and lack of infrastructure. While the country is home to a rich cultural heritage and incredible natural beauty, the risks involved make it a destination best avoided. The U.S. government strongly advises against all travel to Somalia for safety reasons. Number 1. Venezuela. Venezuela has been experiencing severe political and economic turmoil for over a decade. The country's government, led by Nicolas Maduro, has faced widespread criticism for human rights abuses, corruption, and its role in the country's economic downfall. Hyperinflation, widespread shortages of food and medicine, and a collapsing healthcare system have created an extremely unstable environment for both locals and visitors. The U.S. Department of State has issued a Level 4 do not travel advisory for Venezuela, citing significant risks associated with crime, civil unrest, and the absence of adequate consular services. Venezuela, while rich in culture and natural beauty, has become one of the most dangerous and unstable countries for American travelers due to its political repression, economic collapse, high crime rates, and lack of consular support. The risks of kidnapping, violence, and being caught in civil unrest make it an unsafe destination, and the U.S. government strongly advises against travel to Venezuela. Until the political and economic situation improves, it is best for American citizens to avoid visiting the country. Thanks for watching our rundown of the top 10 countries Americans can't visit anymore in 2025. Let us know in the comments if there are other countries you'd like to learn about. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on travel news and tips. Until next time, safe travels